Hello, and welcome to another edition of Brussels Sprouts. I'm Andrea Kendall-Taylor.
And I'm Kate Johnston, standing in for Jim Townsend.
And we're so glad you can join us. Today, we turn our attention to Turkey, where Turkish democracy has come under fresh assault as the Erdogan government arrested the leader of Turkey's largest opposition party and the mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu, and issued arrest warrants for more than 100 others. Imamoglu is being accused of leading a criminal organization, bribery, misconduct, and corruption, all charges he strenuously denies. And the arrest has sparked the largest protests in Turkey in over a decade, and more than 1,000 protesters have been detained in Istanbul. Imamoglu's arrest took place on the eve of his party's primary election, where he was subsequently chosen as the Republican People's Party, or the CHP's, presidential candidate. He is widely viewed as the only potential challenger to Erdogan in the 2028 election. Concurrent with Turkey's domestic turmoil, Ankara is looking to play a bigger geopolitical role, both in Syria and in Europe, especially as the US pulls back from the European theater. Turkey has joined the European coalition of the willing on Ukraine and has signaled a potential willingness to put troops on the ground to secure a peace deal. Turkish companies, especially drone manufacturers, also stand to benefit from greater European defense spending. To discuss these developments and more, we're very pleased to welcome back to Brussels Sprouts Aslı Aydıntaşbaş and Soner Çağaptay. Aslı, Soner, welcome back.
Good to be here, Andrea.
Thank you. Great to be back.
Aslı is visiting fellow at the Center on the United States and Europe at the Brookings Institute, and Soner is the director of the Turkish research program at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Okay, Aslı, maybe we can start with you. And actually, I believe that the kind of crackdown, Erdogan's crackdown in Turkey has been underway for some months now. Can you describe a little bit events leading up to the arrest? What was going on?
Sure. I think that Imamoglu is an exceptional figure in the sense that for years, for over a decade, President Erdogan had the comfort of having a divided opposition run by rather sort of lackluster and non-compelling candidates. And back in 2019, when he won Istanbul, he struck a chord in Turkish society, much the way Erdogan had in 2 decades before that, but creating winning coalitions, election after election. So in 2019, he wins Istanbul twice because the first election is canceled by the government and people are outraged about it. So they go turn in and he wins with 60%, this sort of unknown figure. And then last year, we've seen him, Imamoglu, and other figures in Turkey's opposition bloc finally emerging with a more energized opposition that had learned. Clearly, the leadership on the opposition side had shifted to a younger generation, 50-somethings, from the good old guard, 70-somethings, which had been His Majesty's opposition, so to speak. So you now had younger leaders, Imamoglu and other mayors and the new head of CHP. So last year, they swept across the country, winning all major cities, creating a situation which feels clearly very threatening for the government. President Erdogan is never someone you can write off. He's still a very popular figure, but Imamoglu's popularity has gone up. And of course, with Turkey facing an economic downturn, it is just not clear that he would win an election against Istanbul's very, very popular mayor. So here we are. I think Imamoglu pretty much declared his candidacy. There's this situation, chicken and egg. Did he declare his candidacy because he knew that there was a gathering storm and they were coming after him, or is he a target because he is a likely candidate? I think suffice it to say, these things have moved very quickly. His college degree from 31 years ago was annulled, effectively disqualifying him to be a candidate to run for presidency, because in Turkey you need to have a college degree to be a president constitutionally. And then the arrest, the corruption investigation, and the arrests came. 2 charges: terrorism and corruption. he is arrested on, sort of fraud and corruption charges, but so far at least acquitted on terrorism charges. But of course, that means he goes behind bars with huge demonstrations across the country for 5 days in a row now.
Soner, was this unexpected to you? I was just reading an Economist article that talked about kind of TV stars and soap opera stars and people that maybe had been involved in the Gezi protests had been arrested maybe earlier this year, some other officials in CHP. So to talk to us a little bit about that and whether or not this caught you surprised. When you woke up and you read these headlines, what was your reaction?
I actually saw the headlines just as I was about to go to bed, and a journalist friend who reports from Istanbul texted me and said, "Have you seen the news?" And I looked it up, and I couldn't believe it. I followed President Erdogan's career for about over 2 decades now. I followed his kind of power consolidation at home. But even considering Erdogan's power consolidation and historic trends in Turkey, I think we're at an inflection point regarding Erdogan's career and Turkey's democratic future. The last half a decade or so, many analysts, including myself, had described Turkey's political system as competitive authoritarianism. Erdogan is an autocratic leader, but you are allowed to challenge him at the ballot box, even though the race is not fair, the vote is free. And Imamoglu, as a result, could win the mayorship of Istanbul, largest city, twice, trouncing Erdogan's candidates. We are at an inflection point because it looks like they're eliminating, in my view, the only leader in Turkey who can defeat him at the ballot box, that is Istanbul Mayor Imamoglu. Erdogan is basically removing the competitive adjective from the competitive authoritarian system. So the political system is about to become purely authoritarian. It will look more like Belarus than anywhere else on any other country on the European continent, excluding Russia. And that's not good news, whether it is investor confidence in Turkey or where Turkey is heading. Why did Erdogan do this? Why are we at this inflection point? I think it has a lot to do with the way that Erdogan is threatened, mortally threatened by Imamoglu. In some ways, Imamoglu has a lot of Erdogan's qualities. He's very relatable and charismatic. If you meet him or if you meet Erdogan, you leave the meeting with the same impression. You're like, that's a really charismatic politician. On top of it, Imamoglu is also of Anatolian origins, meaning he represents Turkey's cultural hinterland. He's pious as a Muslim and nationalist as a Turk. These are all qualities that Erdogan also has. But unlike Erdogan, who has a base of exclusively right-wing voters, Imamoglu has built a base of right-wing voters, but also centrist and left-wing voters. He's a social democrat politician, kind of using European terminology. And that makes him a mortal threat. Bigger base, wider appeal, Erdogan-like appeal, but wider than Erdogan's. And on top of it, he's about 20 years younger. So I think Erdogan just saw this really kind of fresh political image of Imamoglu that's rising and decided to nip him in the bud. The timing, I think, was perhaps, in addition to Aslı's commentary, maybe Imamoglu saw this coming or not. But I think the timing is also related to what was supposed to be a primary that took place Sunday by Turkey's on the 23rd of March by Turkey's main opposition, Republican People's Party, CHP. 1.5 million registered party members, also voters, were about to pick Imamoglu and anoint him as their presidential candidate in waiting. I think Erdogan thought that once Imamoglu is anointed and he becomes the presidential candidate, voted by 1.5 million of CHP voters, it'd be too difficult for him to go after him. So he decided to nip him in the bud. And then came the unfolding events of political events in Turkey that we're now witnessing.
I mean, Asla, can I follow up on something that you said? You talked about the fact that his university degree had been rescinded because that's a requirement of standing to be the president. I guess my question is kind of why wasn't that enough? Like that would mean he wouldn't be able to stand for president. Why did Erdogan and the government go even further to lay these charges against him? It's not the first time many of these charges have been laid against him, but why wasn't just rescinding his degree, which would have prevented him from running, enough to stop him going further?
I think in politics, you cannot leave a wounded person on the cornered and wounded. That is more dangerous than anything. Clearly, and Ekrem İmamoğlu still at the helm of Istanbul, which is a huge city. It's a huge municipality with 100,000 employees, running a city of 16 million. Even if his university degree is rescinded, he would have been a formidable opponent. I think what he has done in Istanbul is not just sort of emerge himself on a personal level as a popular mayor, but also he created an ecosystem with cultural institutions and sort of engagement with media and sort of reaching out, construction and transportation, etc., reaching out to segments, touching segments of society beyond just politics. And I think he would have used that platform to campaign for his presidency. Now, Soner mentioned that this coincided with primaries. What happened as a result was on Sunday, 13 million people came out and voted in the primaries. So, well beyond the CHP membership. They opened it up, said that anybody can vote. So 13 million in a clearly an act of sort of rejection and defiance at what happened. 13 million people came out and voted for Imamoglu. I like the way Soner has described both characters in this drama, President Erdogan and Imamoglu, one younger, one older, both mayors of Istanbul, both from the Black Sea, a huge, huge constituency in Istanbul and across Turkey, but also both appealing to broad base, but one sort of really able to appeal to younger voters. More fun, no doubt that one is more fun than the other, Ekrem İmamoğlu. And so I think that the case for nipping in the bud, as Sonar calls it, was quite clear.
I'm still stuck on the timing a little bit. So everything you laid out, the primary, that all makes sense, and going after him before he is kind of chosen as the anointed one to run in the elections, it all makes sense. But Erdogan must have felt that he could get away with it. I mean, this is a major move that was sure to elicit backlash. And so, what do you think? And he's been there for quite some time, as you've all explained. So was Erdogan emboldened? Has he miscalculated? I mean, has something changed in the international context? What is it that you think gave Erdogan the confidence to take such a dramatic step?
I'll step in, and maybe Aslı can add other things as well. I think Erdogan is leveraging a permissive global environment and his incumbency advantages in Turkey rooted in state capture. Very powerful dynamics. So at home, he's consolidated power. Erdogan is a Janus-faced politician. He's got a bright side, delivered economic growth, phenomenal in the context of Turkish history, 15 years of unbroken growth. He won elections mainly on that platform. But since 2018, Turkey's economy has been on kind of a negative terrain, either shrinking or facing high inflation or both. And his base has peeled away. And enter his other side, which has become dominant. He's a nativist populist politician. He's brutalized, demonized, and cracked down on demographics unlikely to vote for him. And so I think Erdogan in this process, of course, has also consolidated significant amount of power over institutions. I would say that at this point, Turkey has no independent institutions remaining. It has some independent courts and media outlets, but they're counting their days as independent entities. So he relies on his complete control of this landscape, from media to courts to institutions, that he thinks he can get away with arresting his key opponent and removing the competitive adjective from Turkey's competitive authoritarian political system. He was also relying on the global environment. US is facing inward. Europe is relying on Turkey to stabilize Syria and Ukraine. Turkey will play a key role in post-conflict Ukraine, patrolling that country. Turkey is already preventing Syria's collapse or descent into another round of civil war. European countries are worried about fresh refugee flows from there. And in the last half a decade, Erdogan has recast Turkey's global identity as a swing state, a middle power that plays Europe, Russia, and US against each other. He expects no pushback and I think he's right in this sense. I expect no meaningful pushback from Europe or US. So that's quite different, considering Erdogan's own career and how Erdogan and Imamoglu are similar, both mayors of Istanbul. Erdogan too was arrested when he was Istanbul's mayor in 1999. At the time, the global environment came to his help. Turkey was a democracy. There was rigorous discussion in the media, civil society. All of these factors came together to frame Erdogan as the representative of the common voter persecuted by the elites. And that brand helped him become a nationally known figure, and he won elections through his party, AKP, a few years later. Now I think Erdogan wants to deny this brand to Imamoglu. He's internationally, I think it will work, even though there's a lot of discussion in the media, such as this wonderful podcast we're doing. Um, I don't think the United States or key European governments will push back against this arrest or pick a fight with Turkey over this. Domestically, I think Erdogan believes that his control of media and civil society space allows him to deny Imamoglu the brand of the representative of the common voter persecuted by the elites. But as Aslı said, I think sometimes it's difficult to predict these developments. Peaceful protests could surge and overwhelm security forces and the president himself. Turkey was a democracy twice longer than Erdogan has been president. So democratic resilience is there. It could end up pushing back. Maybe another factor, last but not least, is of course the global markets. The one thing about Turkey over which Erdogan has no control, markets. How will markets react to Turkey becoming like Belarus? Will they decide that it's not worth putting any money in there because you don't know if your money is going to be safe tomorrow, because you're basically dealing with disappearing rule of law, but the president and his whims. So we're maybe entering some uncharted terrain. In recent years, Turkey has built enough reserves that I think Erdogan feels he can withstand a kind of a market meltdown, and that happened partly last week. Uh, Papers reported that Turkey might have sold $10 billion or more just to keep its currency afloat. These are, in my view, extremely sad developments, given that the country is squandering its hard-earned cash, of course, in this political battle. But it looks like President Erdogan is prepared, and I think he's also prepared to double down.
Aslı, I want you to chime in too, because the thing that I think about too is, I mean, like with Putin and Navalny, he was there for such a long time, and all of a sudden he decides to take action. And then people debate, well, was this a sign of weakness, that the regime was so paranoid that they felt that the risk of letting these people kind of persist and go on was such a significant risk? Or was it a sign of strength that, as Soner kind of outlined, that they think that they can manage the blowback, they have such absolute control? So I don't, impossible to know, but for Erdogan, do you think it was the sign of weakness, or sign of strength and confidence?
I think it was a case of overconfidence. There's no doubt that this is related not just to his consolidation of power domestically, but also his understanding of the geopolitical emergency that we're going to. This is an age where geopolitics trumps over democracy, where hard-nosed transactionalism is more important than values and alliances. And it is true definitely for the Trump administration, but also to an extent it's true for Europeans who've long given up on their sort of transformative power over Turkey and are now looking to see if they can build a new partnership with Turkey for the future European security architecture. So they're exploring various ideas around where Turkey could be helpful, and this is just not the time to pick a fight with the Turkish leadership. Now, if we pivot back to the Trump administration, it's no coincidence that the first substantial conversation between President Erdogan and President Trump took place a couple of days before this detention, which went really great, according to Steve Witkoff. And it was so great that he called it transformational. And he said, "You will hear great news from Turkey soon." I don't really think he was cynical enough to be referring to the arrest of Istanbul's mayor and street demonstrations. I hope not. But I think that probably he was referring to some type of a Black Sea deal between Russia and Ukraine or something or another that's been in the works. But I think that just shows you, Turkey is now extremely relevant and consequential for Syria and its future, for Black Sea security and the future of European security, and also possibly there is, a bromance of some type between the two presidents, which will be part of President Trump's agenda of creating a new set of alliances at a time when America's commitment to the transatlantic alliance is very clearly very weak. So I think that President Erdogan could smell, I wouldn't say desperation, but could smell that there is a new environment. He's long wanted Turkey to be part of this great game and to be at the table. And I think, despite all of this, it might be the case that it will be.
Quick follow-up, very quick. What has been the reaction from Washington and from Europe?
I think meager reaction, maybe. I wouldn't say. The State Department spokesperson said something about civil rights in Turkey, but not like a bit of a general sentence about civil rights are important for Turkish citizens. And Europeans expressed deep concern, I think. Sonar, maybe you will.
I mean, beyond some words, I think zero to non-meaningful reaction. That's how I would describe it. And probably not much more will come, given how Turkey has placed itself center stage on so many issues. In the age of global great power competition, I think from the EU to the UK, which is suffering from its post-Brexit identity surge, to Russia, to US, Gulf countries, they all want to get along well with Turkey, and none are likely to pick a fight with President Erdogan.
Especially over democracy,
Right.
not something they care about.
Before we kind of turn to some of the bigger questions about Turkey's role in the region, what happens next? Is this the kind of end of the CHP's kind of support for Imamoglu? Like, is he just not going to be able to run now? Is he going to be detained for months, years? There's obviously been the huge number of protests, but you've seen large numbers of arrests. You've seen a crackdown on journalists, a crackdown on accounts on Twitter, on X. There's been a particular targeting of photographers, I think, to kind of make sure that those images aren't getting out into the rest of the world. So I know it's impossible to predict, and particularly Turkey is very difficult to predict. But, what are the possible paths for where this goes over the coming weeks and months?
It does look like, street protests will continue for a while, but CHP has this dilemma. On the one hand, they want to speak out. On the other hand, they know that the government can vilify street protests in much the same way they did in 2013 with Gezi, and sort of paint it as vandalism using immense media power. So they have this dilemma in terms of how much of a voice, how much of it should be fought on the streets. And I think they're right to have that dilemma, because Turkey is not a country where you can rely on street demonstrations. And, the crackdown is a real issue. I would say it's not as at this point, it's not as free as Serbia is, for example. So, but I think we're going to have a different climate, that's for sure. CHP now, the new leadership of CHP, Özgür Özel, has huge responsibility in terms of navigating the next phase. They will be facing pressure, but they have a big institutional network if they can. There will be an indictment of some sort eventually, probably 5-6 months before we see an indictment, and later on a court case. These things take a long time, and Imamoglu will send out messages from jail. I think he'll try to maintain his sort of primacy in the opposition as a leader, as a de facto leader, in coordination with the current leader of CHP. But these are all very, very difficult challenges for an opposition party. So the question will be whether they can maintain the kind of support they have now, because it's clear that people are not happy with what is happening, and a sort of constituency beyond the CHP voter is feeling this is unfair. Can they maintain that? Can they maintain that in the face of perhaps some sort of a campaign that would try to hype up the corruption, or use media and social media? It's going to be a big challenge for Imamoglu and Özgür Özel.
And again, comparing and contrasting Erdogan's and Imamoglu's careers, both starting as mayors of Istanbul, both running these cities well. In Turkey, running Istanbul well, it's a very complicated city, not only because of its size, 60 million people. Economically, it's bigger than most European countries, and it's on two continents. So that means you have to manage two completely disparate pieces. And so if you run it well, as Erdogan did and as Imamoglu did, in the eyes of the public, you become presidential. And I think that's another reason Erdogan went after Imamoglu. He realized that Imamoglu was building a brand as an effective mayor of Turkey's biggest city, one of the world's most complicated cities, given its size and its geography. And though at the time, of course, when Erdogan was arrested, his kind of advisors, cadres outside of jail, managed his brand and framed him as this representative of the common voter persecuted by the elites. And that helped him tremendously. Now, in the case of Imamoglu, I think Erdogan is denying that to him as well. He's arrested dozens of Imamoglu advisors. Many of these would be in communications and international relations aspects of Imamoglu's office. So he's, I think, kind of clipping his wings so that Imamoglu doesn't have this kind of network that Erdogan had access to in 1999 when he was arrested to build Imamoglu's image. Is it all doom and gloom for Imamoglu? I think not. As I said, I think peaceful protests could always change how things flow, and it's hard to predict how they go and how big they become. Electorate in Turkey seems very angry. I think the CHP opposition party from which Imamoglu hails did something quite smart. They opened up the primaries. Instead of 1.5 million voters, almost 15 million went to the ballots, including CHP voters. That's about Turkey's population is 85 million. Turkey is about 60 million voters. That's 25% of voters basically in this primary. Unbinding, but they basically said, I like this guy. I want to keep him in the race. That's quite significant. The other factor I think that could help Imamoglu is Imamoglu brand itself, which is why Erdogan is so mortally threatened by him. As I said, you meet Imamoglu, and he has not Erdogan's values. He's a social democrat politician, but he's so much like Erdogan in the context of dispassionate political brands. He appeals to the common voter. He's charismatic. He's relatable. He comes from the Anatolian hinterland. The Black Sea thing is really important. Aslı mentioned it. Black Sea identity is probably the least sexy of Turkey's global identities. I never get invited to a workshop on Turkey and the Black Sea. It's Turkey Middle Eastern, it's Turkey European. I think it's actually a Black Sea country par excellence. That's where its identity is rooted. But beyond that, demographically, Black Sea origin citizens are the plurality of Istanbul's population. They're a big part in its business and cultural and political elite. And Imamoglu appeals to that and Turkey's vast Black Sea hinterland. And in Turkey, being from the Black Sea is sort of like being from Texas in the United States. Your regional identity makes you more of a patriot and not less. So that and Imamoglu's kind of own appeal, I think, is maybe what will help him make a comeback. It'll be difficult because he doesn't have the networks available. His colleagues are also jailed with him. So that means his brand is going to suffer and nobody's going to be out there to say, hey, this is what's happening to him. And so we'll see, of course, how things unfold.
So you don't think this is the end of Turkish democracy? This isn't the death knell, the final straw?
Well, I think that it has crossed the Rubicon into becoming a purely authoritarian system if it doesn't revert. If you don't see a pushback or Erdogan taking a step back. I think it's hard to say it's the end, but I don't think that it's really fair from now on to say that this system is competitive. It's not.
Yeah. Let's turn a little bit to the geopolitics. And Aslı, you started getting at some of this. Well, you both have. What is Turkey putting on offer to Europeans in this moment? I mentioned in the introduction that they've stepped in and potentially might be part of this coalition of the willing to put ground forces in Ukraine. What is Turkey looking to provide to Europe, and what's driving that?
So there are a number of things. The first is obviously a potential role in negotiations. Even though they're held in Riyadh, Erdogan has long held this hope that at some point there will be a meeting in Istanbul. And this is a bit of a longer process. It's going to be longer than 24 hours that President Trump had initially predicted. So there will be side meetings and other meetings. And so Turkey's possible role in part of a ceasefire and holding it in Istanbul is one. Secondly, what they can do for specifically for a European force that may be placed in Ukraine, it's not clear whether there will be a Franco-British force. Is United States going to provide some type of security guarantees? Are they going to be able to mobilize and create a command and control structure that creates a viable tripwire? So these questions are yet to be answered, but I think Turks are now in these conversations. When they were invited to the meeting in London, and I think the question they would ask is whether or not there'll be US backing, clearly. And the second question they would ask is whether or not Russians are okay with it at the end of the negotiations. Russians today say they are no way would agree to European force, but we don't, this is a negotiation and positions change. So I think Turks are keeping their name in the race, but have not committed. The third important issue in all of this in European security is the Black Sea and what type of a post-war arrangement emerges out of it. Specifically, Turkey's naval power in the Black Sea is the strongest one now. I've just written a paper on Black Sea and Turkey's role in Black Sea security for European Council on Foreign Relations, but I thought it would be unseemly to try to announce it and promote it as on a week like this when Turkey's democracy is undergoing such a stress test. So, but it is the case that Black Sea is a place where Turkey can push back against Russia. It does not want to be a very provocative. It does not want to be very provocative in how it deals with Russia. Turks have long leaned on stability with Russia. On the other hand, it does want to play a role in Black Sea security. So those are some of the areas. And of course, maybe to add a fourth element, Turkey, now European countries, as you know, Andrea and Kate, you guys follow this too, are trying to transition to a war economy. Well, Turkey has never left it in a sense. They kept manufacturing in the military industrial complex, so to speak, is being growing in Turkey. It's not just drones, it's every bit that you need, including fifth generation fighter jets now they're planning to put out in 2030. So this is a very important, perhaps, a stopgap measure as Europeans are trying to put their own industrial capacity in order so they can start producing in a couple of years' time. Turkey could fill in that gap in its defense production and manufacturing capabilities. So all of these four topics are very important for Europeans.
Yeah, so same question, but maybe just I'm going to ask the same question, but slightly differently. How much how much opportunity does Turkey sense here? Is it really a calculation that as the U.S. steps out, Turkey is going to step in and try to fill some of that void?
Tons. So here's something really interesting. Turkey is going to be in this new kind of era of transatlantic rift. Hungary is going to be aligned with the US, maybe Slovakia, maybe Italy. Canada and Denmark are rushing to France and Germany and saying, let's set up NATO in EU, NATO in Europe. Turkey is going to be desired by both sides. Trump loves Erdogan, and Erdogan loves Trump. And I think the United States will rely on Turkey greatly in Syria. in Africa, in Eurasia, in great power competition against uh, China and Russia, but also in stabilizing Syria and having a role in kind of a mediated peace in Ukraine. But so will Europe. I think that it's interesting how I kind of started to detect Turkey's return to Europe. I guess it never left because it started as a European country in the 16th century and the Ottoman Empire, where the core of the empire was in Europe, not in the Middle East. But it's returned because whereas it looked increasingly like Turkey was a Middle East actor, now European countries are courting Turkey. Turkey was invited to an EU summit on Ukraine. Turkey rarely gets invited to EU summits these days. I think European countries know that, except for France and UK. Turkey is the third largest serious military, together with UK and France. Turkey is the third just serious military power on the continent. Europe is trying to find a way to balance off against Russia. It will need Turkey. So I think the opportunity here is that Turkey is now desired by Europeans and also by the United States, and that puts it in a very favorable position. Um, I would say Turkey is going to play a key role together with Nordics and Atlantic defense powers in kind of building a new architecture for the European continent. And it will also continue to play with Russia. I think that if asked to pick between French, British, or Turkish troops patrolling Donbass, Putin is going to pick Turkey. So it's hard to be a power these days where you're desired and wanted by Russians, Europeans, and Americans alike. And I think that is the great opportunity, in my view, President Erdogan has sensed domestically, but it's also a opportunity, I think, for Turkey to continue to frame itself as a middle power and kind of keeping its options open, dating everyone, but never exchanging rings with everyone going forward.
The one question I have on the US Turkey side is Syria. So, as we were talking before we hit record, that's one area where the US and Turkey don't see eye to eye. I've lost the thread actually on what Turkey is doing in Syria. Can you, Asla, give us a summary of how that stands?
Can
So
I jump in with a question kind of on the back of that as well? And again, I think probably to bring some of our listeners up to speed is thinking about how the kind of the PKK calling on their forces to disarm, the impact that's had on the SDF, which are the group that largely are in control of northeast Syria. So how those things sort of tie together, I think, is also interesting and would be great, I think, for our listeners to understand.
So, in December, regime falls. HTS, the group that was on the border, that had been running a small enclave on Turkish border, is in charge in Damascus. Of course, this is a group that Turkey knows well and has cultivated good relations with. Their guys that they're close to. They know them. They do not really... even though they're former jihadists, including Ahmed al-Shara, the current leader, they sort of see it as the glass half full. These guys have evolved, and we're willing to bet on them, give them a chance, etc. So Turkey really wants a success story out of Syria and out of the transition in Syria, and that's a huge difference, I think, with the Trump administration, who is not yet produced a Syria policy, but to the extent that it has, it is non-engagement. They've said they're not rushing into Syria. In fact, they are really not engaging with HTS. I think the last engagement was during the final days of the Biden administration. And according to Turks, at least in private conversations, they would tell you they are not sure that Americans want a success story out of Syria. Is the suspicion that there's more of a sort of meeting of the minds with the Netanyahu government in terms of Syria's future, and an understanding that these guys succeeding is not a good thing because they are essentially extremists. So while United States sees Syria through counterterrorism lens, Turkey is like, there's a new regime. Assad is down. Let's make it a success story. Let's go in. Let's lift the sanctions. So that's a big divergence. Despite the Erdogan Trump call, I don't know what they've talked about. I am sure they talked about Turkey. I'm sure President Erdogan has made the case. It's time to lift sanctions. It's time to give these guys a chance. I am not sure the White House is ready for that. Now, there's obviously another dimension to the whole situation in Syria, which is the Kurds, as Kate has mentioned. Turkey started pursuing a peace process with Kurds. It's a very shy peace process, nothing like what they have tried to do back in 2011, 12, 13, which was more like a peace process, as we know from other examples around the world, including Colombia. This one is more like a deal. The difference between a peace process and a deal is whether or not you put democracy in it, major reforms in it. And in this particular case, I think that both the PKK, there's sort of this idea of pursuing a deal, which of course would mean a stability and a deal with Kurds on both sides of the border, both in Turkey and in Syria. It's led by Abdullah Öcalan, the PKK leader. So it's ironic, because Imamoglu, the mayor of Istanbul, is accused also of terrorism for dealing with the Kurdish party and trying to build an election alliance while the government is engaged in talks with the PKK leader for a deal on the Kurdish issue in Turkey and in Syria. But irony is lost in.
It's just the rules only apply to some people.
Exactly. So I'm going to stop here because I want also Soner to chime in. But there is an incredible Turkish Israeli rivalry, quite a dangerous one that is taking place in Syria right now. And I think Turkey is worried about the Kurdish issue becoming a leverage for Israel, and deciding to consolidate on the Kurdish front, consolidate with the Kurds, and part of that is it creates an electoral environment. If there is finally a deal with Kurds, it does create an electoral environment in which the Kurds, I think the theory goes, the Kurds can be peeled off the opposition bloc.
Soner, what would you add? Give us this is an amazing Turkey brief. So
I think Syria is another of these examples where Turkey will be able to play with US, EU, and Russia simultaneously. There is a disagreement over the future of HTS. Many high-level senior people in Trump's security cabinet don't want to engage the HTS. They think once a jihadist, always a jihadist. But Trump administration also wants to leave Syria, withdraw US troops from Syria. So there is a role for Turkey to play. It's the most significant outside actor invested in the success of HTS-led Syria. It has the most number of troops in Syria, including in the class of foreign powers. And I wouldn't be surprised if when he's in Washington, it looks like President Trump might have invited President Erdogan to Washington in their conversation. I wouldn't be surprised if President Erdogan comes with a deal. And President Trump loves deals, and the deal would be, you get out of Syria, I will stabilize it. Maybe we'll need some intelligence assistance from you guys, but don't worry, we'll make it a regional affair. Turkey has already put together a coalition, including Jordan, to contain ISIS and manage prison camps. The flip side of that, I guess, will be the end of U.S. relationship with the SDF, which is one of the biggest issues in the relationship now for about a decade-long problem. U.S. departure, I think, means that SDF cannot rely on U.S. patronship and protection. And SDF kind of dragged its feet and heels in the sand for a long time when the new government in Damascus offered the Syrian Kurdish groups to come and fold under Damascus. SDF said, no, we're not interested. And then CENTCOM Commander General Kurilla went and met SDF leadership. Kurilla probably told SDF leadership and said, we're about to leave. This is probably as good as it gets, including your offers, so go for it. And the next day, literally, SDF basically agreed to fold under Damascus. And so I think we'll see that. So kind of the US part of it is that Turkey is going to provide for Syria's stability, meaning no ISIS resurgence, no threats on the U.S. homeland or allies coming from Syria. And I think that's kind of the extent of Trump administration's involvement in Syria as a policy priority. The European interest is making sure that Syria doesn't descend into another round of civil war, producing another fresh flow of refugees. So Europeans, I think, will help Syria's reconstruction, fund it. They have all reached out to Turkey. Uh, I was shocked how the Austrian president called Erdogan after HTS came to power. I kind of want to look at Austria as a singular example because in the class of EU member countries, you got East Europeans and Southern Europeans, perhaps excluding Greece, which want Turkey to join and become a member. And then you got Northwest Europeans, Germany, Netherlands, Denmark, and others, which say Turkey can become a member if it's democratic again, whereas Southern and Eastern Europe says no, Turkey should become a member. And then there's Austria, which says Turkey cannot and should not become a member, whether it's a democracy or not. To me, it's like Vienna in 1683. Even the Austrians are interested in engaging Turkey. So Europeans need Turkey to make sure there are no refugee flows. Russia even might be brought in, and maybe Russia will keep its bases as a result of a deal brokered by Erdogan and HTS. So I guess although priorities are different, Turkey will continue to shape Syria's future. Like Aslı, I am worried about rising Turkish-Israeli competition. I don't think it will escalate to the level of military confrontation. I think it's more strategic competition. I think Israelis are equally worried about the rise of an HTS government. They do see it also as a threat. They also worried about Turkey's kind of increased influence in Syria. You could say that Turkey and Israel have become kind of de facto neighbors through their presence in Syria and Lebanon, respectively. They're right across, maybe a few miles apart from each other. That's where President Trump could come in. He has great relationships with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and Turkish President Erdogan. He could bring them in a Camp David style format, I guess. He doesn't. I don't think he'll tell them, "I want you guys to work together." They're not going to. I don't think he has to tell them you should cooperate. But he can probably tell them, please don't fight. Please don't get into arguments because I have China and other things to worry about. So I think Israel is one piece that's worries me slightly, but I would say Turkey is going to manage its EU, US, and Russia portfolio as well, and kind of make Syria somehow work.
Well, this has been an amazing Turkey briefing, the best briefing you'll get in town. So I hope listeners enjoyed it. I just learned a tremendous amount, but I want for the very last word for both you, Aslı and Soner, like a little bumper sticker. Like, what would you say? Like, where is Turkey in the arc of its story? I feel like the last time we talked about Turkey, Erdogan was emboldened, the opposition was doing well. There was a lot of questions about how he would do. This seems like a very different story. And so, I don't know, just give us like something very compact. Like, how would you think about Erdogan and Turkey from his perspective at this moment in time?
Probably something like geopolitics over democracy. I think it will be difficult for Turkish democracy to recover from this, even though it is hard for me to know with any certainty what will happen over the next couple of weeks. I would think that, I'm not going to say there is a new regime. There has been an illiberal lurch already. And Soner is right. It's getting less and less competitive out there. So I think that President Erdogan is able to use this moment in history, and to definitely maintain his hold on power.
Yeah. So Sona, so is this an emboldened Erdogan? So he's able to talk to all parties. He's increasingly enmeshed in Europe, doing well in Syria, and he's, decapitating or taking the knees out from his most significant political challenger on the home front. So should we expect a more emboldened Erdogan moving forward?
Events could surprise us, but I think that President Erdogan, who is determined to be Turkey's president for life, is going to do exactly that. He has reshaped Turkey. I would say not recalibrated entirely, but reshaped much of Turkey in his own image. He's been running the country now for almost 2.5 decades. I penned his biography, The New Sultan, and followed his politics for a long time. And I think that he sees himself as Turkey's president for life, and that might as well be the case. I want to kind of flesh out. I loved Aslı's point about geopolitics over democracy. And the geopolitics part of it, I think, is going to help with this goal of Erdogan remaining in power. Turkey is such a consequential middle power. Fascinating, right? It's it's a middle kind of. It's become the ninth largest firepower owning nation in the world, up where it was not even top 20 10 years ago. So militarily, it's capable of quite amazing things in the class of middle powers. It has overseas bases. It's basically part and party to conflicts and governmental affairs in a vast area stretching the Sahel and Eurasia and Balkans. But it's also the only middle power that's simultaneously a NATO member. That's what makes it very consequential. You know, if it's India or Brazil, the US can just ignore this middle power and say, fine, I'll just do stuff without you. In the case of Turkey, unless you disassemble NATO and build a new one, which is not gonna happen, the Turkey is gonna continue to be part of NATO. What will make it consequential? And I think in the Erdogan era, Turkey has also kind of emerged into a post-European space in terms of its global identities. Uh, so it went through a really interesting trial period. 20th century Ataturk's Turkey saw itself exclusively European. The last decade, Erdogan's Turkey saw itself exclusively Middle Eastern. Maybe both were exaggerations. Now Turkey's embracing its European identity, its Middle Eastern identity, but its Eurasian identity. And it's a country basically says, I'm all these three at the same time, but sometimes I'm none of them. So that's why it can dispassionately negotiate and play all these geographies and the key countries in there. So I want to describe it as an Anatolian middle power that deals with Europe, Eurasia, and Middle East, and perhaps that's what informs Erdogan. He's from Anatolia, and that's what makes Imamoglu so attractive. He too is from Anatolia.
So maybe having his cake and eating it too would be your bumper sticker for Erdogan. Anyway, hey, Asla and Soner, this was really excellent. Thank you for doing it. And I look forward to the next time having you back to catch us all up on all things Turkey. So thank you.
Thank you, Andrea, and the
Yeah.
team. Kate.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate and Andrea and everyone. A pleasure to be back on Brussels Sprouts. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Brussels Sprouts, brought to you by the Transatlantic Security Team at the Center for a New American Security. You can find all of our previous episodes wherever you get your podcasts. And please remember to rate and review Brussels Sprouts so that new listeners are able to find the show.